Hello everyone. What a strange game. Let me explain. This game, which was played by two grandmasters, was sent to me by a friend named Gerard. He sent it to me by email, and in the subject line of his email, he explains that white is going to pull off a beautiful attack thanks to the opponent's lag in development. So, I'm curious to see this game. I open it right away to try to understand how a grandmaster could fail to survive the opening and get hit by a devastating attack. But the more I watch the game unfold, the less I understand Gerard's subject line. What is Gerard talking about? Attack and lag in development. I really don't feel like the player who's going to win the game has any development advantage. And I really don't see any attack taking shape. And yet it's going to be a massacre. All right, let's watch. The player with white is an Indian grandmaster named Saran Nial. He starts with e4. And the player with black, Abdisalimov, replies with e6, the French defense. So you probably know that the most popular move is d4, but here white plays d3. And after d5, white plays queen e2. What kind of move is that? For those who know, white is going to try to establish the system of the King's Indian attack, not the King's Indian defense. The King's Indian attack, which involves playing g3, bishop g2, knight f3, kingside castling, and keeping this pawn on e4 with the ability to advance to f5 to gain space, and sometimes to launch attacks against a king who has done kingside castling. So there are two ways to continue. The most popular way is the one the grandmaster played with black. He played knight f6, but there are players who take on e4 and after the capture play e5. That also exists. But here the player with black, he plays knight f6. So the Indian grandmaster, he does not push in e5 right away. He plays knight f3, bishop e7, g3 to play bishop g2 and kingside castling. Black does kingside castling, bishop g2, the c5 push, and there it is. Now we have e5, which drives the knight back to d7. And here white could very well do a kingside castling, but they insert c4. Why this move? c4 creates this pressure on the d5 pawn. White has the bishop, the pawn, and soon the knight to put pressure on d5. And what white wants is for the black pawn to be exchanged or to advance. Not only would that open the white diagonal, but it would also give white the e4 square. That's a square that can sometimes be used to attack the black king. Of course, you might think of a bishop being placed on e4, but more often it's the knight that can use the e4 square. And sometimes it can join the attack with knight g5, supported by the bishop, and even the pawn could also come forward. So as you can see, black is going to leave the d5 pawn where it is. They play knight c6, kingside castling. And white wished to continue with moves like rook to e1 to get a good grip on the pawn on e5. Often bishop f4. There may be developments of the knight on c3, or sometimes even in knight d2, knight f1, the push in h4. The knight returns to h2, knight g4, then knight g5, queen h5. It may seem very, very long to you, but it does exist. There are some very famous attacks that were actually popularized by Bobby Fischer, which show that this attack can happen. Because for black, what are the possible responses? Taking on c4 or pushing d4 actually benefits white. As for the e4 square, I told you about it. So the only real response for black, in the end, is to try to react with f6. And that's what black is going to do. They know this type of attack. With white, they don't want to give white time to settle in and to set up their attacking formation. So they play f6. After the capture, you might expect a recapture with the knight or the rook to defend e6. But it's the bishop that recaptures. And here, the grandmaster with white doesn't fall into the trap. He doesn't go for the pawn on e6. Yet, it's very tempting to take the pawn on e6 because it gives check. And on top of that, you could take d5. But the counterattack can come with knight b4. Attacks the queen, threatens the arrival on c2 to smother the rook. So in this position, the Indian grandmaster doesn't take on e6. He plays knight to c3, increasing the pressure on d5, and black plays knight to b6, defending everything. They defend d5 3 times, they free the bishop, which defends e6, and on top of that, they start attacking. c4. How to defend? c4, it's not immediately obvious. We certainly can't play b3 because we would definitely lose the knight. We absolutely do not want to capture because that action would ultimately give black a significant advantage in the center. So how do we defend c4 one more time? Well, it's true that for now, it's also defended twice. But here, the player with white is going to play kd2. He comes back to defend again. He frees his bishop to triple the pressure on d5. King to d4, because since the king to df3 is no longer there, king to d4 comes in and the queen has to retreat. Queen d6. And you understand what I'm trying to say. Gerard said yes, an attack with a development lag. But who is behind in development here? Black. Black is well developed, they're well positioned. They have a strong central presence, and yet, in just over 10 moves, Black will resign after a decisive attack against the Black king. Incredible. Especially since White doesn't really seem to be heading for the king side. They play knight b3. Now that's clever, this knight to b3 move, because Black could now win the c4 pawn. The queen is no longer there to protect it, nor the knight. But the idea of White is that they want to take back the e4 square, as we mentioned earlier. If Black takes on c4, we can play knight to e4, attacking the queen and the bishop, and the knight on e4 can support the other knight's capture on c5. So the player with Black, he takes b3, queen takes, and now he wants to play d4, but he doesn't want to block his bishop, so he'll play bishop takes c3, queen takes, now the d4 push, queen to f5. As I told you, in less than 10 moves, the attack will be decisive against the Black king. Yet the queen comes to the queen side, to the other side. Knight d7 is played. Bishop f4, of course, we wanted to play this move. But e5, the bishop retreats. d2, queen g6. Attacks the d3 pawn. And here, I'd be curious to know what you would play in this position. Because what the Indian Grandmaster is about to play is the move of the game. The most difficult and most beautiful move to find, the one that meets the demands of the position. What would you do in this position? I invite you to pause the video to give yourself enough time to think. So what would you have played? It's hard to resist the temptation to play bishop e4. It seems like the natural move. We're going to play bishop a4, we protect the d3 pawn while turning the attack onto the queen on g6. And yet it's not the best move in this position. The Indian Grandmaster is going to play the best move in the position. He's going to play f4, leaving his d3 pawn under attack. But he's right to do it. This push to f4 actually meets all the demands of the position. Why? Let's go back a little bit. What are the imbalances? There is a lasting imbalance, the pair of bishops for White. They have two bishops against only one. So they need to try to open up the position to take advantage of their pair of bishops, and especially the dark square bishop, which for now is blocked by this trio of central pawns. So playing f4 is an attempt to unlock things, the center, especially the e5 pawn, and to give squares and diagonals to the dark square bishop. You know that bishops like open positions. Also, the black rooks are not connected. And so wanting to play f4 to open the file will benefit the white rooks who they are already connected and can exchange the black rook without black being able to recapture. So with this move f4, white may be sacrificing a pawn, but they open up the position to the advantage of their pair of bishops and their rook connected and to the detriment of the black king. So queen takes pawn, bishop d5 check. The king is forced to go to h8 and then capture on e5. We recover the pawn without black being able to take back. The knight can't take, of course, because there would be checkmate. And if black takes the rook, we recapture. And it's the same because capturing the pawns isn't possible due to checkmate on the 8th rank. Either the queen or the rook. So black doesn't recapture and plays rook to e8. Rook to f3. We attack the queen, protected by the bishop, and we free up the f1 square, gaining time for the other rook. It really looks like a Paul Morphy game. You know, Paul Morphy liked these positions or games where all his pieces were active. He used to say, make your pieces happy and they will make you happy. And here, all the white pieces are starting to come to life. Queen to g6, rook to f1. And now black is really having some trouble. The knight can't really move. You have to control the f8 square because white is threatening checkmate. In fact, white is threatening queen c5 to deflect the knight, and then to be able to play rook f8, check, rook p1 and the other. It all ends with a back rank mate. So the player with black plays queen bravo 6. He offers the exchange of queens. But that's when the queen starts to reorient toward the king side. Queen a4 to come back to c2 next. It's always complicated for black. The knight cannot move. It cannot go and take the pawn on 5, again because of the math involved. If we play g6, the bishop will move to h6, a very good square for him. So black played h6 to try and solve their problem of back rank mate. But queen to c2 comes to control the h-square, and the knight still can't move. Because of the rook, rook to f8, rook takes, and the other rook recaptures, and that's another check. And checkmate. So black plays a 5. It's not a very good move, but it's hard to know what they can play in this position. The knight can't move, so neither can the bishop. The rook has to stay guarding the 8th rank. And the queen, if you look closely, she barely has any square left. So a5 was played, and white plays e6, attacking the knight, to then get to f8. And the grandmaster with the black pieces resigns here. So why does he resign? He could play knight f6. And now, what would you play with white? I invite you to pause the video one last time to try to find the winning sequence. So you got it? Some may have thought of bishop, take pawn to deflect the g-pawn and take the knight. Others may have been interested in the arrival of the queen. For example, g6. But the decisive move is rook takes knight. If black doesn't recapture, they've lost a knight. The attack continues. And after pawn takes, that allows the queen to come in, attacking the rook and threatening the f6 and h6 pawns with check. And even though we're down a rook, it's impossible to save the black king here. For example, if black plays bishop to e6 so that both rooks protect each other, we can eliminate both pawns, for instance. We take on h6 with check, then come back to g6. If he goes to f8, we take on f6 with check. He goes back to g8, g6 with the rook controlling king to h8 and, for example, rook f4. And faced with the threat of rook to h4, black is at a loss. Well, I hope you enjoyed this rather unusual and fun game with this opening where, let me remind you, we had e4, e6, d3, d5, and queen to e2. It shows that even when you don't play the main lines, you can be very creative and lead to very dynamic and tactical games as we've just seen. So you can leave me likes, comments, share the video, or support the channel. We'll see each other again soon. Goodbye, everyone.